In a quiet little town, there lived a man who everyone knew as one of the hardest working people around. He wasn't rich or famous, but he had something far more valuable: a loving family. Every morning, this man woke up before sunrise to head to his mechanic shop, where he spent long hours fixing cars for customers. His hands were rough from years of work, but they were also gentle when it came to holding his children's hands or hugging them tight after a tough day. At home, things weren't perfect, but they were happy. The man had 2 kids, a bright-eyed girl and her younger brother, who always seemed to have paint smudges on his fingers because he loved drawing so much. Their mom stayed at home most days, taking care of the house and making sure the kids felt loved. It was a simple life, without fancy vacations or expensive clothes, but laughter filled their small home every evening during dinner. That's what made it special. But deep inside, the wife wasn't completely satisfied. She dreamed of a different kind of life, one filled with luxury cars, designer dresses, and trips to exotic places. She often found herself scrolling through pictures online of glamorous parties and wishing she could be part of that world. Sometimes she'd look at her husband and wonder how someone so ordinary could make her feel content. But over time, those feelings grew stronger, eating away at her happiness bit by bit. One day everything changed. A new face entered the town, a wealthy businessman who owned several companies. He drove flashy cars and wore suits that looked like they cost more than the family's entire house. When he met the wife, he didn't waste any time showering her with compliments and promises of a better life. At first, she tried to resist, telling herself that she loved her family too much to leave. But the allure of wealth and excitement was hard to ignore. As weeks turned into months, the businessman kept pursuing her. He invited her to dinners at high-end restaurants, gave her expensive gifts, and painted vivid pictures of all the amazing things they could do together if she left her current life behind. Slowly but surely, the wife started spending less time at home and more time with him. Her heart began to shift, torn between the comfortable yet humble life she shared with her family and the dazzling future being offered to her. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, while the kids played outside and the man worked under the hood of a car in his shop, the wife packed a suitcase. Without saying goodbye to her children, not even leaving a note for them, she walked out the door forever. All she left behind was a short, cold message addressed to her husband. "I can't live like this anymore." When the man came home that evening, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Dinner wasn't ready. The house was eerily quiet, and the kids sat worriedly on the couch, wondering why their mom hadn't called them for snacks. Panic set in as he searched the house, only to find her belongings gone and the note lying on the kitchen counter. Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut. How could she abandon her own children? What would they do now? The days that followed were some of the hardest the man ever faced. Not only did he have to deal with his own pain and betrayal, but he also had to figure out how to comfort his confused and heartbroken kids. They asked questions he couldn't answer. Where is Mom? Why doesn't she love us anymore? Each question cut deeper than the last. Still, he promised himself that no matter what happened, he wouldn't let his family fall apart. He owed it to his kids to keep going, even when it felt impossible. Neighbors noticed the change in the household and stepped in to help however they could. Some brought meals, others offered to babysit the kids when the man needed to work late. Slowly, they adjusted to their new reality. Life wasn't easy, but it became manageable, and though the absence of the wife left a permanent scar, the bond between the father and his children grew stronger with each passing day. Little did anyone know, the story was far from over. Years later, the choices made that fateful day would come back to haunt and perhaps heal those involved in ways no one could have predicted. Life after the wife's sudden departure was anything but easy. The man found himself juggling 2 full-time jobs, working as a mechanic during the day and being both mother and father to his kids at night. There were mornings when he woke up, exhausted, wondering how he'd manage another day. But every time those thoughts crept in, he looked at his children's faces and remembered why he had to keep pushing forward. The kids struggled too, though in their own ways. The little girl who used to come home from school bubbling with stories about her friends became quieter. She missed her mom deeply but didn't know how to express it. Instead, she poured her feelings into books, spending hours reading or writing stories in a notebook she kept hidden under her bed. Writing gave her a way to process everything that had happened, even if she couldn't talk about it openly. Her younger brother, on the other hand, coped differently. He clung to memories of his mom, often asking his dad questions like, "Do you think she misses us?" Or, "Will she ever come back?" At first, these questions broke the man's heart, but over time, he learned to answer them honestly without letting his own emotions overwhelm him. "I don't know," he'd say gently. "But what I do know is that we have each other, and that's something no one can take away." Despite the challenges, the man worked hard to create stability for his family. He set aside one night a week for family dinner, where they'd sit together, share their days, and laugh over silly jokes. On weekends, they explored nearby parks or went fishing by the lake. These small moments helped them find joy again, even in the absence of what they'd lost. But while the man and his kids slowly rebuilt their lives, the woman who had left them behind wasn't faring as well as she thought she would. Her new life with the wealthy businessman seemed perfect on the surface. Luxury cars, designer clothes, fancy vacations. But beneath the glitz and glamour, cracks began to show. The businessman wasn't the charming prince she'd imagined him to be. He was controlling, often dismissing her opinions and treating her more like an employee than a partner. Worse still, the emptiness inside her grew with each passing day. First, she tried to convince herself that leaving her family had been the right choice. After all, she finally had everything she'd ever dreamed of, right? But late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of her decisions pressed down on her chest, she couldn't stop thinking about her kids. What were they doing now? Did they hate her for leaving? Had they forgotten her completely? One evening, unable to shake off the guilt, she decided to search for them online. Typing her ex-husband's name into a search engine, she braced herself for what she might find. To her surprise, an article popped up, a local news piece highlighting the man's dedication to raising his children alone while contributing positively to the community. Accompanying the story was a photo of him smiling proudly beside his kids at a charity event. Seeing that picture hit her like a punch to the gut. They looked happy, thriving even, despite everything she'd put them through. The little girl, now older, stood tall with confidence while her younger brother grinned widely, holding up a painting he'd created. The sight of them filled the woman with a mix of emotions, pride, regret, and an overwhelming sense of loss. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to admit the truth. She'd made a terrible mistake. As weeks turned into months, the woman's dissatisfaction with her new life deepened. The businessman's financial empire started crumbling due to poor investments, and their once lavish lifestyle began to fade. Arguments became frequent, and the relationship grew toxic. Alone in her gilded cage, she realized that money couldn't buy happiness. Not real happiness, anyway. The kind of contentment she saw in that photo of her ex-husband and kids was something she could never achieve with wealth alone. Haunted by memories of her past, the woman started questioning her choices. Late at night, she'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was too late to fix things. Could she ever earn forgiveness from the family she'd abandoned? Would her kids even want to see her after all these years? The thought terrified her, but deep down she knew she had to try. Meanwhile, the man continued building a life filled with love and resilience. His daughter blossomed into a bright, ambitious teenager, excelling in school and dreaming of becoming a writer someday. Her stories, inspired by her experiences, captured raw emotions that resonated with teachers and classmates alike. Her younger brother, now a curious preteen, discovered a passion for art, creating vibrant paintings that told tales of hope and imagination. Watching his kids grow into such incredible individuals filled the man with immense pride. Though their journey hadn't been easy, they'd overcome so much together. And yet he couldn't help but notice the lingering sadness in his daughter's eyes whenever someone mentioned mothers or families. It was a reminder that some wounds took longer to heal than others. Little did anyone know, fate was about to intervene in unexpected ways. The woman's growing regret would soon lead her to make a decision that could change everything, for better or worse. Years had passed since the woman walked out of her family's life, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and broken hearts. Life had moved on for everyone involved, but the scars remained, some visible, others hidden beneath layers of resilience and hope. The man and his children had grown closer than ever. Their bond wasn't just built on shared meals or bedtime stories. It was forged through countless sleepless nights, quiet conversations about dreams and fears, and an unspoken promise to never let each other down. The daughter, now a teenager, carried herself with quiet confidence. Her love for writing had blossomed into something extraordinary. She wrote essays that won school competitions and short stories that touched the hearts of her teachers. Each word she penned seemed to carry fragments of her past, yet they were laced with hope for the future. Her younger brother, growing taller by the day, found solace in art. His room was filled with sketches and paintings, vivid bursts of color that told stories without needing words. Some pieces depicted happy memories, like fishing trips with his dad or lazy afternoons spent playing outside. Others were more abstract, reflecting emotions he couldn't quite put into sentences. Art became his voice, his way of processing the complexities of life. But despite their progress, the absence of their mother lingered like a shadow. For the daughter, it manifested as anger, a simmering resentment toward the woman who had left them without so much as a goodbye. She often told her friends, "I don't need her. We're better off without her." Yet late at night, when the house grew silent, she'd stare at old family photos tucked away in a drawer. In those moments, sadness crept in, softening her tough exterior. For the son, things were different. He didn't hold on to anger the way his sister did. Instead, he clung to memories of his mom, the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her hugs, and the way she used to read him bedtime stories. Though years had passed, he still hoped deep down that she'd return someday. Sometimes he'd ask his dad, "Do you think she thinks about us?" The man always answered truthfully, "I don't know, but I hope wherever she is, she's okay." Meanwhile, the woman lived a life far removed from the simplicity she once knew. At first, the glamour of her new world dazzled her. Luxury cars, designer clothes, and vacations to exotic places. But over time, the cracks began to show. The wealthy businessman she'd chosen over her family turned out to be nothing like the charming figure he'd appeared to be. He was possessive, dismissive, and quick to criticize. Arguments became frequent, and the relationship grew strained. Worse still, his financial empire started crumbling, forcing them to scale back on their extravagant lifestyle. Loneliness gnawed at her relentlessly. Surrounded by wealth but devoid of genuine connection, she often found herself staring at the walls of her lavish home, feeling emptier than ever. Late at night, guilt would wash over her like waves pulling her under. She'd replay the moment she walked out the door, wondering if she could have done things differently. What hurt the most was knowing she'd abandoned not only her husband, but also her children, the very people who had needed her the most. One restless evening, unable to sleep, she decided to search for updates about her family online. Typing her ex-husband's name into a search engine, she scrolled through the results until she stumbled upon a local news article. The headline read, "Single Father Inspires Community While Raising Kids Alone." Accompanying the story was a photo of him standing proudly beside his children at a community event. The sight of them took her breath away. Her daughter looked radiant, exuding confidence and grace. Her son stood beside her, holding up one of his colorful paintings with a wide grin. They looked happy, or at least content, in ways she hadn't expected. Seeing how well they were doing without her filled her with pride and shame in equal measure. Pride because they'd clearly grown into remarkable individuals despite everything. Shame because she realized she'd missed out on being part of their journey. That night she cried harder than she had in years. Memories flooded back, her daughter's giggles during playtime, her son's tiny hands clutching hers as they crossed the street. She thought about all the milestones she'd missed. Birthdays, school plays, report cards, and quiet moments that made up the fabric of family life. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She'd traded priceless memories for temporary luxuries. Determined to make amends, she sat down and wrote a letter. It wasn't easy. Every word felt heavy, weighted with regret and uncertainty. She poured her heart into it, apologizing for leaving and expressing her desire to reconnect. Not as a romantic partner, but as a mother seeking forgiveness. She ended the letter with a simple plea. "If there's any chance you're willing to see me, please let me know." She mailed the letter with trembling hands, unsure of what response, if any, she'd receive. Days passed, and each morning brought a mix of anticipation and dread. Would they even open the letter? Would they hate her for reaching out after all these years? When the man received the letter, he read it quietly, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to tear it up and throw it away, refusing to let her back into their lives. But another part of him recognized the sincerity in her words. This wasn't about him, it was about his children. So he called a family meeting. Sitting around the kitchen table, he handed the letter to his kids. "This came for us," he said softly. "It's from your mom. I think you should decide whether you want to respond." The daughter snatched the letter, scanning it quickly before slamming it onto the table. After all this time, she expects us to forgive her? Just like that? Her voice trembled with anger. She left us. She didn't care enough to stick around. Her brother, however, looked thoughtful. "Maybe she does care now," he said, cautiously. "Maybe she wants to fix things." Their differing reactions sparked a heated debate. The daughter accused her brother of being too forgiving, while he argued that everyone deserved a second chance. Watching them argue, the man stepped in gently. "It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling," he told them. "You don't have to decide right now. Take your time." Eventually, the daughter agreed to meet, but only once. If the woman truly meant what she said, then maybe, just maybe, she deserved a chance to explain herself. Reluctantly, the man arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. On the day of the reunion, nerves ran high. The woman arrived first, pacing nervously outside the cafe. When she finally saw her children walking toward her, accompanied by their father, tears welled up in her eyes. Her son approached her hesitantly, giving her an awkward hug, while her daughter stood back, arms crossed, her face unreadable. "I'm so sorry," the woman whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish and I made a terrible mistake." Her daughter stared at her coldly, refusing to soften. "Sorry doesn't change anything," she said sharply. "You left us. You chose someone else over us." Her son, ever the peacemaker, tugged at his sister's sleeve. "Give her a chance," he pleaded softly, "please." The tension in the air was palpable, but amidst the pain and anger, a glimmer of hope flickered. The woman knew she had a long road ahead of her if she wanted to earn back their trust. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, redemption was still within reach. The reunion at the cafe was tense, to say the least. The air felt heavy with unspoken words and years of pent-up emotions. The woman sat across from her children, her hands trembling as she clutched a napkin tightly. She looked older than they remembered, her face lined with worry and regret. Her eyes darted between her son's cautious smile and her daughter's steely glare, searching for any sign of forgiveness. For the son, seeing his mother again stirred up feelings he hadn't fully processed. He'd spent so many nights wondering about her, whether she thought about them, whether she missed them. Now that she was sitting right in front of him, he didn't know what to feel. Part of him wanted to hug her and tell her everything was okay, but another part of him couldn't ignore the years she'd been absent. Still, he tried to ease the tension. "I like your hair," he said softly, gesturing to the way she'd styled it. It was a small comment, but it carried weight, a tiny bridge being built over a vast chasm. His sister, however, wasn't ready to extend any bridges just yet. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression unreadable except for the flicker of anger in her eyes. "Why now?" she asked sharply, cutting through the awkward silence. "Why are you here after all this time? You left us without even saying goodbye. Do you have any idea how much that hurt?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unavoidable. The woman swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she began, her words stumbling out unevenly. "But I need you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I found was emptiness. Every night, I've thought about you two, about your dad. I see your faces in my dreams, and I can't stop asking myself why I gave it all up." Her confession didn't soften her daughter's stance. Instead, it seemed to fuel her frustration. "So what? You're sorry now? That doesn't bring back the years we lost. It doesn't erase the fact that you chose someone else over us. Over me." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying the pain she'd buried deep inside. The father, who had chosen to sit quietly in the background, watched the exchange with a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because he could see how much this meeting meant to everyone involved, and relief because, despite the tension, they were finally talking. Communication, no matter how painful, was the first step toward healing. The son reached across the table, placing a gentle hand on his sister's arm. "Maybe we should hear her out," he suggested softly. "She came here, didn't she? That has to count for something." His sister shot him a look that said, "You're too soft," but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned back to their mother, her jaw set firmly. "Fine," she said curtly. "Talk. But don't expect me to believe you'll stick around this time." Encouraged by her reluctant agreement, the woman took a deep breath and continued. "When I left, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. For me. For my future. But I was wrong. So wrong. I realized too late that money and fancy things don't mean anything if you don't have people who love you. And I threw away the most important people in my life. You two. And your dad." Her voice broke, and tears spilled down her cheeks. For a moment, the room fell silent except for the faint sound of her sobs. The son shifted uncomfortably in his seat, torn between wanting to comfort her and feeling unsure if he should. His sister, however, remained stoic, though her grip on her coffee cup tightened noticeably. After a few moments, the woman wiped her tears and pressed on. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, not yet anyway. I just want a chance to show you that I've changed. I want to be part of your lives again, even if it's just as someone on the sidelines cheering you on. You don't have to trust me right away. I know I messed up, but please, give me a chance to make things right." The son nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Okay," he said simply. "We can try." His sister shot him another sharp glance but didn't argue this time. Instead, she turned back to their mother, her voice low and measured. "If you really mean what you're saying, then prove it. Don't just talk. Show us. Actions matter more than words." The woman nodded fervently, relief washing over her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I won't let you down. I promise." Over the next few weeks, the woman made an effort to reconnect. She started small, sending texts to check in on her kids, asking about school projects or upcoming events. At first, her messages went largely unanswered, especially by her daughter, who remained guarded and distant. But her son responded occasionally, sharing bits and pieces of his life, like photos of his latest artwork or updates about soccer practice. Eventually, she worked up the courage to visit again. This time she brought gifts, a sketchbook for her son and a novel written by one of her daughter's favorite authors. When she handed them over, her daughter raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You remembered I liked this author?" she asked, clearly surprised. "I remember a lot of things," the woman admitted, her voice tinged with emotion. "Things I should have held on to tighter." Her honesty seemed to soften her daughter's defenses, if only slightly. Though she still kept her distance, she began acknowledging her mother's presence more openly. Meanwhile, her son welcomed her visits eagerly, sharing stories about his art and eagerly showing off his creations. Their bond grew stronger with each interaction, though it was clear that rebuilding trust would take time. One day, during one of her visits, the woman noticed a framed photo on the living room wall. It was a picture of the family taken years ago before she'd left. In the photo, everyone was smiling, her husband holding their son on his shoulders while their daughter stood beside them, grinning ear to ear. Seeing it hit her like a punch to the gut. Those smiles represented a time when life had been simpler, happier, a time she'd walked away from. "I miss this," she murmured, pointing to the photo. "I miss being part of this." Her ex-husband, who had been standing nearby, looked at her thoughtfully. "It's not easy to forget what happened," he said gently. "But I think the kids appreciate your effort. Just keep showing up. That's what matters." She nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "I will," she promised. "No matter how long it takes." As weeks turned into months, the family dynamic began to shift. Slowly but surely, the woman earned back some measure of acceptance from her children. Her son embraced her return wholeheartedly, eager to rebuild the relationship they'd lost. Her daughter, though slower to warm up, started letting her guard down bit by bit. They weren't a perfect family, they never would be, but they were, learning to navigate their new reality together. Through it all, the man remained a steady presence, supporting his children, while allowing them the space to decide how they wanted to handle their mother's reappearance. He knew that true healing required patience and understanding, qualities he'd always embodied as a parent. And so, piece by piece, the shattered fragments of their family began to come together again. Not perfectly, but with hope and resilience guiding the way. As the months rolled by, the woman's efforts to reconnect with her family began to show signs of progress, small victories that hinted at the possibility of healing. She visited regularly, always bringing something meaningful: a book for her daughter, art supplies for her son, or homemade meals that reminded them of simpler times. Each gesture was deliberate, aimed at showing she cared in ways that went beyond words. Her relationship with her son grew stronger with every visit. He loved sharing his artwork with her, explaining the stories behind each piece. One day, he proudly showed her a painting of their old house, the one they used to live in before everything fell apart. The colors were vivid, capturing the warmth and joy of days gone by. When she saw it, tears welled up in her eyes. "This is beautiful," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've got so much talent." Her compliment made him beam with pride. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a mom who truly saw him, not just as a child, but as someone unique and special. Their bond deepened with each conversation, each shared laugh. Slowly, he started calling her Mom again, though it still felt strange on his tongue after so many years. Her daughter, however, remained cautious. While she no longer ignored her mother outright, she kept her interactions minimal and guarded. There were moments when curiosity got the better of her, and she'd ask questions about her mom's life now. But whenever her mother tried to steer the conversation toward apologies or explanations, the daughter would shut down, retreating into silence. Forgiveness, if it came at all, would take time. One evening, during one of her visits, the woman decided to bring up an idea she'd been thinking about for weeks. "I was wondering," she began hesitantly, "if maybe I could attend one of your school events. Your dad mentioned you're working on a big project for class." The daughter looked at her skeptically. "Why do you want to come?" she asked, bluntly. "You haven't cared about my projects before." Her directness stung, but the woman didn't shy away from the truth. "Because I want to start caring now," she replied honestly. "I can't change the past, but I can be here for you moving forward, if you'll let me." After a long pause, the daughter shrugged non-committally. "Fine," she said, "but don't expect me to introduce you to anyone." It wasn't exactly an invitation, but it was a step, a small crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The woman accepted it gratefully, knowing that even the tiniest opening was worth celebrating. The day of the school event arrived, and nerves ran high. The woman dressed carefully, wanting to look presentable but not overly flashy. As she walked into the auditorium, she spotted her ex-husband sitting near the front with their son. Her heart raced as she scanned the room for her daughter, finally spotting her standing beside a group of classmates. She waved tentatively, but her daughter barely acknowledged her, instead focusing intently on the stage where students were presenting their work. When it was her daughter's turn to speak, the woman watched with bated breath. Her daughter stood, confidently, delivering her presentation with poise and clarity. It was clear how much effort she'd put into it, and the audience responded warmly, clapping enthusiastically when she finished. As the applause filled the room, the woman couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was her daughter, a strong, intelligent young woman who had thrived despite the challenges life had thrown her way. Afterward, as people milled around chatting, the woman approached her daughter cautiously. "That was amazing," she said, softly. "You did such a great job." For a moment, her daughter didn't respond. Then, almost reluctantly, she muttered, "Thanks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the woman's heart swell with hope." Meanwhile, the father continued playing a crucial role in navigating this delicate situation. He encouraged open communication between his children and their mother, reminding them that forgiveness didn't have to happen overnight. "Take your time," he told them repeatedly. "Feel whatever you need to feel. Just remember, she's trying. That counts for something." He also supported his kids individually, ensuring they processed their emotions in healthy ways. With his daughter, he listened patiently as she vented her frustrations, validating her feelings without judgment. With his son, he celebrated the budding relationship between mother and child while gently reminding him to set boundaries if needed. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, the topic of trust came up. "Do you think she's changed?" the son asked thoughtfully. "Or do you think she might leave again?" His question hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. The father sighed deeply before answering. "I can't say for sure," he admitted. "People can change, but it takes time to prove it. What matters is how she acts moving forward, not just what she says." His words resonated with both children, planting seeds of cautious optimism. They knew rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy, but they also understood that it was possible if everyone stayed committed to the process. As winter approached, the family found themselves spending more time indoors together. During one particularly cold weekend, the woman suggested baking cookies, a tradition she remembered fondly from when the kids were little. To her surprise, her son immediately agreed, excited at the prospect of reliving old memories. Her daughter hesitated but eventually joined in, muttering under her breath about how it wasn't a big deal. They spent hours in the kitchen, rolling out dough and cutting shapes with cookie cutters. Laughter bubbled up unexpectedly as flour dusted everyone's faces, turning the activity into a lighthearted game. For a brief moment, it felt like old times, the kind of cozy family moment they hadn't experienced in years. When the cookies were finally baked and cooling on trays, the woman turned to her children with a soft smile. "Thank you for letting me be here today," she said sincerely. "It means more to me than you know." Her son grinned, reaching for a cookie. "You're welcome," he replied cheerfully. His sister said nothing, but the corners of her mouth twitched upward ever so slightly, a subtle sign that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to soften. Despite these positive developments, challenges remained. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and there were still moments of tension and doubt. The daughter occasionally lashed out, accusing her mother of being insincere or selfish. The woman bore these outbursts silently, understanding that anger was part of the healing process. She focused on staying consistent, showing up even when it was hard, and proving through actions rather than words that she was serious about making amends. Over time, her persistence paid off. Small breakthroughs became more frequent. A shared laugh over a silly joke, a quiet moment of connection during a walk in the park, or an unprompted hug from her son. These moments weren't perfect, but they were real, and that made all the difference. By the end of the year, the family dynamic had shifted significantly. The cracks that had once seemed irreparable were slowly being filled with newfound understanding and tentative trust. No one pretended that everything was fixed. They knew the road ahead would still have its bumps. But they faced it together, united by a shared desire to move forward. And so, as snowflakes drifted lazily outside their window one December evening, the woman looked around the room at her family and allowed herself a moment of quiet gratitude. Redemption wasn't easy, but it was possible. and for the first time in a long time she dared to believe that second chances weren't just a dream. They were within reach. Years had passed since the woman first reached out to her family, hoping for a second chance. What started as tentative steps toward reconciliation had grown into something more substantial, a fragile but real connection that continued to strengthen over time. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still moments of tension, doubt, and lingering pain. But through patience, effort, and a shared commitment to moving forward, they began to find their footing again. The daughter, now in her late teens, was preparing to graduate high school. She'd blossomed into a confident young woman, excelling academically and earning recognition for her writing. Her essays often explored themes of loss, forgiveness, and resilience, topics deeply rooted in her own experiences. Though she rarely spoke about it openly, those close to her could see how much her past shaped her perspective on life. Writing had become her way of processing everything she'd been through, turning pain into art. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table working on a speech for her graduation ceremony, her mother walked in carrying a tray of tea. They'd come a long way from the days when their interactions were stiff and awkward. Now, though not entirely comfortable, they shared a quiet understanding, a mutual respect built on small gestures and countless conversations. "Almost done?" her mother asked gently, setting the tray down. The daughter glanced up briefly before returning to her notebook. "Not quite," she replied, her tone neutral but not cold. It was progress compared to how things used to be. Her mother lingered for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You know," she said hesitantly, "I've always admired your strength. Even when I wasn't here, you kept going. You didn't let anything stop you." The comment caught the daughter off guard. For a moment she paused, pen hovering over the page. Then, without looking up, she muttered, "It wasn't easy." "I know," her mother admitted softly, "and I'm so sorry for that. I wish I could take back what happened, but I can't. All I can do is be here now and try to make things better." The sincerity in her voice struck a chord. The daughter set her pen down and looked at her mother for the first time in minutes. "You're trying," she acknowledged finally. "That counts for something." It wasn't an outright declaration of forgiveness, but it was enough. For now. On graduation day, the auditorium buzzed with excitement. Friends and families filled the seats, cheering loudly as students crossed the stage to receive their diplomas. The father sat proudly beside his son, clapping enthusiastically whenever someone's name was called. A few rows behind them, the mother watched nervously, unsure if her presence would be welcomed. When the daughter's name echoed through the room, she stepped onto the stage with poise and confidence. As she accepted her diploma, the crowd erupted in applause. But what brought tears to her mother's eyes was the subtle nod the daughter gave her from across the room, a silent acknowledgement that meant more than words ever could. Afterward, during the reception, the family gathered around a table laden with snacks and drinks. The atmosphere was light-hearted, filled with laughter and stories about the future. The son proudly showed off his latest painting, which he'd created as a gift for his sister. Titled New Beginnings, it depicted a sunrise breaking through storm clouds, a metaphor for their family's journey. "This is incredible," the daughter said, genuinely touched. "Thank you," her brother grinned. "You inspired me," he teased. "All those deep essays of yours got me thinking." Their banter drew smiles from everyone at the table, even their mother, who watched silently, soaking in the moment. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, a testament to how far they'd come. As the months rolled by, the family settled into a new rhythm. The mother continued visiting regularly, attending events and celebrating milestones alongside her ex-husband and children. There were still moments of tension, especially with the daughter whose trust remained guarded. But even she couldn't deny the change in her mother. Gone was the woman who once prioritized wealth and luxury above all else. In her place stood someone humbler, more grounded and genuinely invested in being part of their lives. One afternoon, while helping her son prepare for an upcoming art exhibition, The mother noticed a sketchbook lying open on his desk. Curious, she flipped through its pages, marveling at the creativity and emotion captured in each drawing. One particular piece caught her eye, a portrait of the entire family standing together under a tree, smiling warmly. In the corner he'd written, "We're stronger than we think." Tears welled up in her eyes as she turned to him. "Did you draw this recently?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. He nodded shyly. "Yeah, I wanted to capture how things are now, not perfect, but better." She hugged him tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered, "for giving me another chance." By the time the holidays rolled around, the family found themselves gathered at the father's house for Christmas dinner. It was the first time in years they'd celebrated together as a complete unit. The decorations were simple but heartfelt, and the air buzzed with warmth and laughter. Even the daughter seemed more relaxed, joining in games and conversations without hesitation. As they sat around the fireplace later that evening, exchanging gifts and sharing memories, the mother felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. Looking at her children, the daughter who had taught her the value of resilience and the son who reminded her of the power of forgiveness, she realized just how lucky she was to have them in her life again. "You know," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I used to think happiness came from having everything I wanted, but I was wrong. Real happiness, it comes from moments like this. From being with the people you love." Her words hung in the air, met with nods of agreement. No one needed to say anything more, they understood. After years of heartache, missteps, and hard-earned lessons, they had found their way back to each other. And though scars remained, they served as reminders of the strength it took to rebuild what had been broken. As the fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows on the walls, the family sat together, content in the knowledge that they were whole again, not perfectly but authentically. Redemption had been a long and winding road, but it had led them exactly where they needed to be, with each other.